In the mid-1940s, one of the most famous actors in Hollywood shocked the film industry with a decision that few people expected. The actor was Basil Rathbone, and the role that made him famous was the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes. At that time, Rathbone was strongly connected to the character in the minds of audiences around the world. Many people believed he was Sherlock Holmes. His sharp face, calm voice, and intelligent presence seemed perfect for the role. The films were successful, audiences loved them, and the studio believed the series could continue for many more years. Because of this success, the studio made Rathbone a very generous offer. They wanted him to continue playing Holmes for a long time, and they were ready to pay him a huge amount of money to keep the character alive on screen. Reports later suggested the offer was worth around $1 million, an enormous amount of money during that period. For most actors, such an offer would have been impossible to refuse. Yet Rathbone shocked everyone by saying no. Instead of celebrating the offer, he chose to walk away from the role that had made him famous. His decision confused fans, surprised the studio, and even damaged some of his professional relationships. But behind this surprising choice was a deeper story about fame, pressure, and the danger of becoming trapped inside a character. To understand why Rathbone reached this point, it is important to look at how his career developed before Sherlock Holmes entered his life. Long before he became the famous detective, Rathbone had already built a strong reputation as a serious and talented actor. He was known for his work on the stage, especially in classical theater. He performed in many plays by William Shakespeare and developed a reputation for discipline, elegance, and strong dramatic ability. His background in theater gave him excellent control of his voice and movements, which later helped him succeed in film. When he moved to Hollywood, he quickly found work because he had a unique screen presence. Rathbone often played villains or complicated characters who carried both intelligence and danger. Audiences remembered him from major films such as Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, where his skill with sword fighting made his duels exciting and realistic. In fact, many people believed he was one of the best swordsmen working in Hollywood at the time. Directors trusted him to perform intense fight scenes because he trained carefully and took the work seriously. His performances earned him respect from critics and other actors, and he even received Academy Award nominations during the 1930s. At that time, Rathbone was not simply a movie star but a respected performer who could move between theater and film with ease. His career seemed stable, respected, and full of possibilities. Everything changed in 1939 when Rathbone was chosen to play Sherlock Holmes in the film The Hound of the Baskervilles. The character of Holmes had already been famous for decades because of the stories written by Arthur Conan Doyle. Readers loved the brilliant detective who could solve mysteries using logic, observation, and careful thinking. When Rathbone stepped into the role, he immediately captured the attention of audiences. His thin face, sharp eyes, and confident manner made him look exactly like the detective many readers had imagined. Critics praised his performance, and the film became a success. Soon another film followed, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and the partnership between Rathbone and actor Nigel Bruce as Dr. Watson became extremely popular. Their chemistry on screen helped bring the famous detective stories to life for a new generation of moviegoers. During the early 1940s, the films continued, and Rathbone played Holmes again and again in a series produced by Universal Studios. The movies were shorter and made with smaller budgets, but audiences continued to enjoy them. For viewers living through the difficult years of World War II, these detective stories offered excitement and comfort. Rathbone's calm and intelligent detective seemed like someone who could always find the truth and defeat evil. Because of this success, Sherlock Holmes became the role that defined Rathbone's public image. Unfortunately, the same role that made him famous would also become the reason he eventually chose to walk away. As the Sherlock Holmes films continued through the early 1940s, the character began to dominate the public image of Basil Rathbone more than anyone expected. At first, this seemed like a great success. The movies were popular, audiences recognized him everywhere, and the studio kept producing new installments. Many actors spend their entire careers searching for a role that audiences remember, and Rathbone had found exactly that. However, the same success slowly created a problem that he had not predicted. People stopped seeing him as a skilled actor who could play many different characters. Instead, they began to see him only as Sherlock Holmes. This process, often called typecasting, can be dangerous for actors because it limits the kinds of roles they are offered. Rathbone had once been known for Shakespeare performances, sword-fighting villains, and dramatic characters. Now audiences expected him to be the calm detective who solved mysteries with logic and observation. The change happened gradually, but it soon affected the way studios treated him and the way audiences reacted to his other performances. During this period, the Sherlock Holmes series also changed in important ways. The first two films, including The Hound of the Baskervilles, were produced with larger budgets and were set in the traditional Victorian world created by Arthur Conan Doyle. But when Universal Studios continued the series, they moved the stories into the modern 1940s. This allowed the detective to fight spies, criminals, and enemies connected to the global conflict of the time. The change helped the films feel relevant during World War II, but it also meant that the movies were produced quickly and with smaller budgets. Rathbone and his co-star Nigel Bruce continued their performances with professionalism, but the pace of production became intense. Several Holmes films were released within only a few years. For Rathbone, this meant returning to the same character again and again without much opportunity to explore different kinds of acting work. While audiences enjoyed the detective adventures, Rathbone began to worry that his career was becoming trapped in a single identity. Behind the scenes, the pressure of the role began to affect Rathbone's personal feelings about the character. Some reports from the period described small moments that revealed how uncomfortable he had become with the constant association with Sherlock Holmes. On the film set, people often joked about the detective or treated Rathbone as if he actually possessed Holmes's brilliant mind. At first, he tolerated these comments, but over time they started to bother him. According to stories from the production of the films, Rathbone eventually began eating lunch alone in his dressing room instead of joining the cast and crew. Some observers believed this was simply a personal habit, but others suggested that he wanted a break from the constant jokes and reminders about the character. A memo about this situation reportedly reached the press, turning what should have been a private matter into a public story. For Rathbone, who valued his professionalism and dignity, the attention felt humiliating. Instead of being recognized for his long career as a talented actor, he felt reduced to a single fictional identity. Despite these frustrations, Rathbone continued performing the role for several years because the films were still successful and the studio wanted the series to continue. Audiences remained loyal to the partnership between Holmes and Watson, and many viewers believed that Rathbone was the perfect representation of the famous detective. In fact, for many people of that era, his performance became the standard by which all other portrayals were judged. Even decades later, fans of the detective stories would often mention Rathbone when discussing the most accurate screen version of Sherlock Holmes. While this reputation honored his acting ability, it also made it harder for him to escape the character. Every new film strengthened the connection between the actor and the detective, making it more difficult for audiences to imagine him in other roles. By the middle of the 1940s, the situation had reached a point where Rathbone began seriously thinking about his future. He had spent years bringing Sherlock Holmes to life on screen, but he worried that if he continued much longer, he might never be able to return to the broader acting career he once enjoyed. He had always been proud of his stage work and his ability to perform in many different styles of drama. Now he feared that all those achievements might be forgotten. When the studio eventually approached him with a new contract to continue the Holmes series, including a huge financial offer, Rathbone faced one of the most difficult decisions of his career. Accepting the offer would guarantee financial security and continued fame. Rejecting it would mean risking his future in order to regain his artistic freedom. It was a moment that forced him to choose between money and identity, between the comfort of success and the hope of rediscovering himself as an actor. By 1946, the popularity of the Sherlock Holmes films had reached a level that few people in Hollywood could ignore. The detective stories starring Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce had created a loyal audience that continued to return to theaters again and again. The films were not always large productions, but they were dependable successes. Because of this, the studio believed the series could continue for many more years. From a business point of view, the idea made perfect sense. Audiences loved seeing Sherlock Holmes solving mysteries, and Rathbone's portrayal had become the face of the detective for an entire generation. As a result, studio executives approached him with a major offer to continue playing Holmes in future films and possibly other projects. Reports later suggested that the deal could reach around $1 million, a huge amount of money for an actor during the 1940s. The contract would have guaranteed Rathbone both financial security and continued fame. For many actors in Hollywood, this would have been a dream opportunity. Yet for Rathbone, the offer created a deep personal conflict that forced him to think carefully about the direction of his life and career. At this point in his life, Rathbone had already spent many years working in film and theater. He had once enjoyed a wide variety of roles, ranging from villains in adventure films to dramatic characters on stage. His performances in movies such as Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood had shown his skill with sword fighting and his ability to bring energy to historical adventures. He had also earned respect for his stage work and had received recognition from critics for his acting talent. However, the long run of Sherlock Holmes films had slowly changed the way people saw him. Instead of remembering his range as an actor, audiences and producers increasingly thought of him as only one character. Rathbone understood that if he accepted the new contract, the connection between him and Sherlock Holmes would become permanent. He feared that every future opportunity in his career would be shaped by that single role. For someone who cared deeply about the art of acting, this possibility felt like a kind of creative prison. Rathbone also worried about the effect the role was having on his personal life. The constant production schedule of the Holmes films left little time for other projects, and the public attention surrounding the character could be overwhelming. Fans often approached him as if he truly possessed the detective's brilliant mind. Some even asked him to solve real problems or mysteries in their lives. Although Rathbone appreciated the admiration of audiences, the experience could also feel exhausting. He had spent years building a reputation as a serious actor, yet the public image of Sherlock Holmes had begun to overshadow everything else he had accomplished. The idea of continuing this situation for many more years made him uneasy. When the moment finally arrived to decide whether to sign the new contract, Rathbone made a choice that surprised many people in Hollywood. Instead of accepting the money and continuing the series, he refused the offer. The decision shocked studio executives and confused some fans who could not understand why an actor would reject such a large payment. For Rathbone, however, the choice was about more than money. It was about protecting his identity as an actor and finding a way to escape the shadow of Sherlock Holmes. By stepping away from the role, he hoped to return to the stage and explore new opportunities in film and television. The decision also had consequences for his relationship with Nigel Bruce. The two actors had worked together closely for many years, and their partnership had become one of the most beloved duos in detective film history. When Rathbone chose to leave the series, Bruce continued performing as Dr. Watson in radio adaptations of the stories. Although the friendship between the two men remained respectful, their professional paths began to move in different directions. For fans who had grown accustomed to seeing them together, the change marked the end of a memorable era. After leaving the Holmes films, Rathbone attempted to rebuild his career in new ways. He returned to the theater, where he felt more comfortable exploring serious, dramatic roles. He also appeared in radio programs and other entertainment projects that allowed him to use his distinctive voice and acting skills. While these opportunities kept him active, they did not always bring the same level of fame that the Sherlock Holmes films had provided. In many ways, Rathbone discovered that escaping a role as famous as Holmes was far more difficult than he had imagined. Even after he left the series, audiences continued to associate him with the detective. The character had become such a powerful part of his public image that it followed him wherever he went. Yet despite the challenges that came after his decision, Rathbone never seemed to regret walking away from the role. For him, the choice represented an effort to maintain control over his career and to prove that he was more than a single character. His refusal of the studio's offer became one of the most talked-about moments in his professional life. It showed that even in the glamorous world of Hollywood, an actor sometimes has to choose between financial success and personal freedom. After turning down the large offer to continue playing Sherlock Holmes, the career of Basil Rathbone entered a very different phase. For nearly a decade, he had been closely connected to the famous detective, and the films had brought him steady work and international recognition. Walking away from that success meant stepping into a future that was far less certain. Rathbone hoped that leaving the role would allow him to return to the wide range of acting work he had enjoyed earlier in his career. He wanted audiences to remember that he was not only Sherlock Holmes but also a skilled stage performer and a talented film actor who could play many kinds of characters. However, the reality of the entertainment industry proved more complicated than he had expected. Even though he had chosen to leave the detective behind, the public continued to think of him as Holmes. Casting directors and producers often struggled to imagine him in other roles, and the offers he received were not always as strong as the ones he had enjoyed before the Holmes films made him famous. Because of this situation, Rathbone began focusing more on the theater, where he had first developed his love for acting. On stage, he felt freer to explore different characters and to reconnect with the classical performances that had built his early reputation. He appeared in a number of productions and tours, often performing works by William Shakespeare and other well-known playwrights. These performances reminded audiences that he possessed a deep understanding of dramatic acting and that his talents extended far beyond detective stories. The theater also gave him a chance to interact directly with audiences, something he had always enjoyed. While the stage work did not always bring the same financial rewards as the film industry, it allowed Rathbone to rediscover the artistic satisfaction that had drawn him to acting in the first place. At the same time, Rathbone found new opportunities in radio, which had become one of the most popular forms of entertainment during the 1940s and 1950s. His strong and recognizable voice made him a natural performer for radio drama and narration. He appeared in several programs and storytelling productions, bringing characters to life through voice alone. Radio allowed him to continue working with mystery and adventure stories while also exploring different types of roles. Even so, Sherlock Holmes never completely disappeared from his career. Because his portrayal had been so memorable, producers often invited him to perform Holmes again in radio adaptations. In some cases he agreed, especially when he could work again with his longtime partner Nigel Bruce. Their voices together recreated the familiar chemistry that audiences loved in the films. However, Rathbone remained careful not to become trapped once more in the same role that he had struggled to escape. During the later years of his life, Rathbone's film appearances became less frequent and sometimes less prestigious than his earlier work in Hollywood. The golden age of adventure films in which he had once thrived was changing, and new styles of cinema were becoming popular. As a result, he occasionally accepted smaller roles in films that did not match the importance of his earlier performances. Some of these appearances surprised fans who remembered him as the elegant villain from films such as The Adventures of Robin Hood or the intelligent detective from the Sherlock Holmes series. Yet, even in these smaller roles, Rathbone's professionalism remained clear. He approached each project with dedication and continued to demonstrate the discipline that had defined his entire career. Despite the challenges of his later years, Rathbone's legacy in the history of film and theater remained strong. For many viewers, his version of Sherlock Holmes became the image that defined the character on screen. Later actors would interpret the detective in their own ways, but Rathbone's performance continued to influence how audiences imagined Holmes's personality, appearance, and manner of speaking. The partnership between Rathbone and Nigel Bruce also helped establish the familiar dynamic between Holmes and Watson that would appear in many later adaptations. Because the films were widely distributed and often shown again on television in later decades, new generations of viewers continued discovering Rathbone's work long after the original movies had been released. When Rathbone died in 1967, he left behind a career that had spanned theater, film, and radio. His life showed both the rewards and the challenges of fame in the entertainment world. On one hand, the role of Sherlock Holmes brought him enormous recognition and secured his place in popular culture. On the other hand, the same role created a powerful image that sometimes overshadowed the rest of his achievements. Yet the decision he made in the 1940s to step away from the detective also demonstrated his determination to protect his identity as an actor. Rather than allowing one character to define his entire career, he chose to pursue the broader artistic life he believed in. Today, Many historians of film and theater remember Basil Rathbone not only as the actor who brought Sherlock Holmes to life, but also as a performer who valued independence, professionalism, and dedication to his craft. Even many years after Basil Rathbone stepped away from playing Sherlock Holmes, the connection between the actor and the famous detective never completely disappeared. This was partly because the Sherlock Holmes stories themselves remained extremely popular around the world. The detective created by Arthur Conan Doyle had already become one of the most famous fictional characters in literature, and every new generation of readers and viewers continued to discover the mysteries of Baker Street. When people watch the older Holmes films on television or listen to radio recordings, Rathbone's sharp voice and intelligent performance often became their first experience of the character.